Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Work Well podcast. Today on the show, I'm delighted to welcome back Brian Pennie. So this episode is brought to you thanks to the Fruit People. The Fruit People are leading the way in workplace nutrition, both in office and remotely. Check out thefruitpeople.ie for more. Now, listeners to the show and members of the Work Well community will be familiar with Brian's story. From 15 years of chronic heroin addiction to PhD at Trinity College. And, if you're interested in that story, if you haven't heard it yet, you can listen back to episode 4 of season 2 of this podcast. So I asked Brian back today to speak about a specific area, and that's alcohol and our relationship with it. Now, as always, Brian had some, really powerful advice and real life experiences to share. There's so much value in this episode. I'm sure that you're going to need to listen to it a few times over. Let's get straight in to the conversation with Brian Pennie. So Brian, hello and welcome back to the Work Well podcast.
Thanks for having me back, Brian. Really looking forward to this.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Yeah, you're the first guest that we've welcomed back.
Ah, nice, nice. Good to hear. The ego loves that. I don't, but the ego does.
And listen, bring us up to speed. How's life and how's work for you at the moment?
Yeah, life is good. Life is busy, Brian. So I'm in the depths of a PhD thesis, right up 70,000 words. So it's a slog. It's a slow grind. I've given myself. I'm always talking about there's a thin line between self-delusion and self-belief, and I've crossed it. Self-delusion was my world for many years. But it was like I wrote my book 80,000 words in 4 months, the bulk of it, the whole book before editing. And I says, I'll get the PhD thesis done in 3 months. I don't think it's going to happen. I should have 10,000 words done by now based on that. And I'm at about 3,500 words. So that's not going to happen. So we'll see how it goes. But here, life is good, enjoying the challenge, and I'll get through it,
Great stuff. Yeah, no, so 70,000 words. Yeah, that's a decent, decent chunk. I saw your Instagram update earlier. You had, just another 65,000 words to go. So you have the back broken on it there.
I have the back broken on it. And you know what? I have more. It's like I've more work done than the percentage of that. I've the structure within it as well. I've some of the research methodologies that I can call from other studies. So it looks worse than what it is, and that's why I'm not panicking. That's why I'm still in self-belief mode, and I haven't crossed over to self-delusion yet. But who knows?
Very good.
Come back to me at the end of June and we'll see where we are with this.
We'll check in again then.
Yeah.
But listen, Brian, thanks for coming back, first of all, because the main reason we asked you back was, well, one, because you're fantastic and you deliver a powerful session, a powerful conversation every time we hear from you. But I guess, so you've been on the podcast, you've been on a couple of webinars, and it was the webinars in particular, we received a couple of questions that we were overwhelmed with questions, actually. We just didn't get around to them, but they were specifically related to alcohol. And I know you've kind of touched on this very briefly in the past. I mean, we've mostly spoken about your relationship with heroin, and we're going to include the links to the webinars in the previous podcast. And I'd encourage anyone who's not familiar with your story to check those out first. But I think I'm right in saying that alcohol played a part at that time also.
It played a huge role in my life, Brian. It really did. Like, I was always a drinker. Like, I started drinking when I started doing other drugs. But heroin, when I started doing heroin at 17, that was me crutch. That was the thing that helped me to escape from the anxiety that I thought was helping me to escape. Obviously, it was causing it in the end. But I was a drinker all along. I was always a drinker because I wasn't a real addict. I still lived in the real world. I was a functional addict, and I always drank. And then up until the end of my addiction, like I was drinking like a shoulder of vodka at least a day, mixing with heroin, mixing with other drugs, benzos, just anything to numb the pain. So it was a combination of everything, to be quite honest. So, and I always believe if I never found heroin and I was brought up in a different area where it wasn't easily accessible, I think I would have been just a raving alcoholic. Like, I think that would have been me go-to drug. So it's addiction is addiction. It really is. I think we'll be touching on that later today as well.
Yeah. And so, just you were always a drinker. Would you consider yourself an alcoholic as well at that time, or was it was it mostly the drugs, I guess?
Yeah, see, that's the funny thing. Like, whatever numbed the pain. Like,
Yeah.
obviously, I was a heroin addict. I was on a methadone program, so I took methadone. I'd done heroin every day. That's just the nature of that drug. But if they weren't there, I would have been doing probably lots of Valium and alcohol. So I drank every day as well. So I was just an addict, and anything like,
Right.
as an addict knows, anything that helps to numb the stuff gets it away. Like, there was a time when I wouldn't have drinking every day because heroin was me go-to drug, and it gave me the relief that I needed. But like all drugs, especially drugs like heroin and cocaine, that your brain adapts and tolerance kicks in, and you need more of the drug to get more of the buzz. So I ended up having to mix drugs then to relieve the anxiety and the pain that I was going through. And what happened in the end, and I was just scientifically combining different drugs, including alcohol, to help me to get out of my head. Basically, that's what I was doing. So it played a core role. And I'd have drank every day for the last 10 years of my addiction, like heavily.
Right.
Heavily. Yeah.
And the last time we spoke, you said something really interesting. You said, when you were in work and you were in the height of your addiction, you said that your colleagues at work thought you were an alcoholic,
And that was okay.
and that was almost acceptable.
Yeah.
That you were an alcoholic. Yeah.
It was funny, it was, and I often tell the story. Like, on my very last, when they were trying to get me out of the job for very good reasons, I was falling asleep everywhere. Like, it was horrific, and I was in a meeting with the union. And the very last meeting, I went to try to keep my job because I was falling asleep at the workplace, and he knew I had a drug problem. I fell asleep at that meeting. I didn't realize I fell asleep at that meeting, and I said to my union reps after, who was also my manager, "That went well, didn't it?" And he was looking at me saying, "What? You fell asleep?" I'm like, "Oh." And there was one of the managers, he was the factory manager at that meeting, and he's retired now, so he won't mind me saying it. He's retired from the company now, won't mind me saying it. But only a couple of months previous to that, like, it was all, I only heard back on this after the event. And he says, sure, what you call it? He says, he just loves his gargle. So we all have a few drinks. We all enjoy a few drinks. And he would have having a bit of a drinking issue as well. So, like, management, it's not just the staff of companies that might have drinking issues. Management, leaders, CEOs can have drinking issues as well. Yeah. So it makes it, and in Ireland, in England, in most countries, to be quite honest, it's a worldwide problem. Alcohol is just more accepted.
Yeah. And then there's some interesting statistics out today, actually, just kind of released today. I think just related to lockdown, like the overall alcohol consumption has gone down by 6.5%. But
wow.
If you consider that the pubs have been closed for a year,
yeah,
that means that there's a definite increase in people drinking at home, I suppose. Like, what is it in? I mean, is it possible to put a finger on in Irish society, maybe in the UK as well, that that it was almost acceptable that you were an alcoholic, if you like, or that you liked a few drinks? Like, what is it in our society that makes that kind of accepted?
Don't know. And you know what? We say this, Brian. We say this, but like, Ireland isn't even the worst in Europe. We're the fourth worst in Europe. That's what the statistics show. Mm-hmm. So and there's evolutionary wise or historically, we've been on, like, we have the cold winters. That's why we have our potatoes, we have the stews, we have a whiskey sitting around. Like, historically, we'd be sitting around the fire in the house, drinking a whiskey, telling stories, and it's just part of our history, part of our tradition. Like, if you look at more Scandinavian countries as well, and even like over in the Alpine countries as well, they have their schnapps. So all of these cold countries seem to have their drinks, that way. So I just think it was something that became woven into the fabric of society, and then we were known as having the crack, like the attitude that goes with it, it's just going out and having the crack. And here it's okay to have a bit of fun and have a drink if you can do it in a normal way, I suppose. But then I just think it got out of hand in Ireland, where it was accepted for people just to go a bit crazy on the drink, and it can just get out of hand. I don't think we talk about real issues. I don't think we're very good at that. I think I noticed that in Europe, like, when I used to go skiing a lot when I was younger, and like, even they go into the saunas and they go in nude together. So not taboo. They just say it as it is. But I think when someone has a drink problem, we don't like talking about feelings, I think, traditionally, as much as other countries, and I think that could play a role in it as well.
Yeah, really interesting stuff. Yeah, I've spent quite a bit of time in Latin America, for example, and I can see, I mean, you're talking huge populations, and there's obviously exceptions, but I can just see it just seems to be just a more positive relationship with alcohol. Like
Yeah.
and it's funny, you can buy alcohol anywhere. You can buy it in your local shop. You can buy it at 7 a.m. in the morning. But it just doesn't, in general, it just doesn't seem to be abused. I mean, I see it's almost, I guess a beer is almost like a Coke. You know, you might have one with your lunch or something, or you might have one or two with your dinner, but it's not, they don't drink to get drunk per se, as has been the case. I guess depends on the age cohort as well. But that was certainly when I was growing up. The friends I was hanging out with, just a group I was in, we were drinking to get drunk, and that was it was for fun. It was hilarious to get drunk and wasted. I just didn't see that culture, that relationship with alcohol in certainly in the Latin American countries.
Yeah, that brings me back to the company that I worked in. We went over to Ghent on a couple of occasions to a company called Barco Graphics. They're called Esco Graphics then after that they merged. But they have a big, huge facility, a big graphics facility where they train people up. And we used to love going over there. Like, I'll give you a few examples of this. This just shows how crazy it is. So they had a tap in the in the canteen, a beer tap. Like, so you go in, you can get a beer, but you see the odd person getting a beer. But we were like so excited by this. Oh my god, they have a beer tap in here, and we were bringing glasses of beer into the second half of the class with us, all as a cure, because we were so hungover from the night before. And I remember one time me and a friend of mine went over to Esco, and I couldn't believe they let the two of us go. Two sort of boozers let us go on our own. And we went over and we had to collect all the receipts to go back through so they can give it to the company. And we're supposed to collect restaurant receipts and all, and not show we were drinking 24/7. When we got back to the airport, well, I can't remember anything from the holiday. We actually call it a holiday to the MD one time. He says, a holiday? We were over training now, but we were called into the office because all our receipts were alcohol. And he says, the financial director looked at us and says, look, one of these, the triple vodkas and Red Bull, when you are home in the airport after you go home, like, this just isn't acceptable. And we thought that was funny. And we were telling other people what happened and thought it was hilarious. And other people were laughing. So it's like, that's, when I look back on that now, that's really sad. It's really pathetic when I look back on that. It wasn't funny. It was someone that couldn't cope with emotional pain or anxiety. And I was drinking myself into oblivion on that trip because I couldn't bring heroin over with me. And it was just really, really sad. But I think back to the Irish thing, we just laugh about these things. And you know what the thing is? It is kind of funny at the time, like these stories to be funny, and it is, there's a banter within that. But I just think we have it very mixed up in terms of what's funny and what's not funny and where to draw the line. And I think other countries have it much better systems around that. They just have better boundaries around that.
Yeah. I mean, guess lots of Irish people, myself included, would almost like even now would associate alcohol with a reward, if you like, at the end of a busy week, busy working day. It's a beer or two, it's a glass of wine, whatever it is. That's the reward. It's like a reward. I wonder, is there a way to remove that reward or to change it up, at least mix it up a little bit?
Well, this is really interesting. What we're going to go, I won't go into the details now because I know we're going to be getting into this, but like the big part of a reward, like the big part of any behavior or any bad habit is the reward. If there was no reward, the behavior, whether good or bad, would not continue. That's the be all and end all. Any habits are like that. But when you say a reward, it's really interesting. So from your PhD, at the moment, I'm doing the whole literature review around that. And I'm looking at substance misuse and looking at the prevalence of alcohol and stuff like that. And I'll just give you a few stats that actually blew me away. So globally, 2.4 billion people are current drinkers. And that's like, you'd say, right, it's only probably 30% of the population, but like 2.4 billion current drinkers out there. Yeah. But 100 million of those have alcohol use disorders. There's 3 million deaths per year from alcohol. That's 5.3% of the deaths worldwide are down to alcohol. And like it should be noted as well, the FDA, like if alcohol came on the scene right now, like we would only be allowed probably like a milligram, like a drop in our drink. That's the standards that the FDA would have. But because it's in our society so long, like if a new drug comes along, they ban it straight away. But they can't ban alcohol because it's ingrained in the society. But like it's causing 5.3%, 1/20th of the deaths in the world come from alcohol, which is crazy. And in the US alone, it costs the healthcare system for alcohol 223 billion. So the stats on that are absolutely incredible. And you says, yeah, people drink it as a reward. And I'm looking into drinking motives as part of my PhD. And like they go into enhancement motives, conformity, all this academic jargon. But I was thinking, right, why do people drink? In lay terms, why do people drink? And I think any bad habit, alcohol included, it's to fill a gap of something that's missing. I truly do believe that's what it is, whether it's connection, meaning, purpose, or to escape emotional pain, whether it's trauma, heartbreak, or stress, or anxiety. But even low level anxiety or something like that, like you just want to, I'll have a drink to just to loosen up. So I was actually interested in this from a lay perspective, and I stuck it up on my Instagram. I was like, right, I'm going to do a little trial. Now, usually I'd get about 5-10% of people responding to an Instagram poll like that. But out of 1,500 people that seen the message, I think I had 400 responses. Crazy amount of responses. And it just shows that everyone has an opinion on this. And it's really interesting. I think people might be interested in the results of this. So when I asked all of these people about why they drank, here's the different answers. And I sort of put them together into groups. So relaxation, to unwind, relieve stress and anxiety, boredom, to switch off, to feel more confident, fit in with the crowd, numb emotional pain, meet other people, escape reality, permission to go crazy, loosen up, and generally feel better about themselves. And I find it strange because when I was chatting to you, and reward was in there once or twice, but it was very few that actually says a reward at the end of the day. So I think a reward is like maybe the healthier version of it. If you're looking at just a little reward to boost myself, but it's how often you do that as well. And then addiction or problematic drinking or whatever way you want to look at that, it really only becomes, there's lots of definitions of that. But when it starts causing problems in other areas of your life, when you're drinking every day and someone else has a problem and you can't stop, that's when it becomes very, very problematic.
So some interesting statistics there, and we'll come back to that. Tell us, just finish off your own story there as well, because so you said yourself, for the last 10 years of your drug addiction, you were also drinking every day, and you know there's a great story about how you made that decision and you went to Wexford and you finally came clean. Talk us through that just again, if you wouldn't mind, because at the time, I think last time we spoke, I was anyway focusing on, you know, you're cleaning you're ridding yourself of the drug addiction, but there was alcohol in there as well. And that must have, is that obviously an extra complication on top of everything?
Not really, because like I was taking crack, I was taking cocaine, I was taking not so much of that in the latter years, but the big problems for me, it would have been alcohol and benzos. I had to get off alcohol and benzodiazepine, which is Valium and Xanax. I had to get off them to allow me to get into the opiate facility, a detox, get off opiates. So it was, I always talk about I had a benzo fit, but what you can have from alcohol withdrawal as well, it's called, we know it's the delirium tremens, the DT is made famous by Christy Moore song. But it's so I basically had a seizure on the back of alcohol and benzo withdrawal. So I basically had a big convulsive seizure. Like it's like your brain just getting scrambled at a physical level. That's when I bit my tongue in half and I ended up in hospital and all these different things. So what happened for me, I didn't have to deal with alcohol specifically, because I was able to, it was all about, I had to just completely change my life. But something that I don't say very often, I definitely don't say it in addiction circles, because I don't want anyone in recovery to get ideas, because some people just can't drink. So when people get into recovery, and basically they might be an angry drunk, they might still hate the world and they're not happy in themselves. So you have to get at the core of the issue. So eliminating the alcohol that's just a behavior. And we're going to be talking about this as well. Eliminating the alcohol is not good enough. You need to work on something deeper. So my problem was anxiety. Anxiety drove me towards trying to anesthetize myself into oblivion. So once I sorted out my anxiety issues, I didn't have an addiction issue and a need and a motivation to drink or do drugs. So it's really interesting. Like I was 3 years clean. I was wondering, like, could I have a drink again? Could I have a glass of wine? I didn't really want to be quite honest. But I remember one Christmas saying, I'll just try a glass of wine just to know if I could. It's weird that I'd done that. And it's probably a bit dangerous at the time, but I remember like, I haven't got an issue. I don't really want this, to be quite honest. And for me, energy is the currency of life. I love having energy. I love doing what I do and putting as much time into things I do. So I can have a glass of wine today, and once a month, maybe I'll sit down and have a glass of wine with my girlfriend. We probably get a bottle. She'd have 2.5 glasses out of a glass and a half, and I have that. But I don't really like doing it. I don't see it as a reward. I see it as a punishment, because the following day, I'm like, oh, my energy, even for my glass, my energy levels are a little bit low. So it's interesting. In that moment, it gives me a little bit of reward, but it doesn't, I'm not stressed and I'm not anxious. So it doesn't relieve anything. I'm not going through emotional pain. So it's not rewarding me with that. So sometimes the alcohol isn't the reward. It's what it removes is the reward. So you can have, in psychological terms, it's called positive reinforcement. So it's like, give you something. If I give you money, you're positively reinforced. So people work because it's a reward. The money is the reward. They're going to work more because they're getting paid. Take that money away, they'll stop working. That's the basic behavioral science behind that. But with alcohol, they might think alcohol is the reward, but if that's relieving stress or anxiety, it's taking something away. That's the real reward. So it's negative reinforcement, taking something away to increase the behavior. So I think when it comes to alcohol, you might get a little bit of a buzz, but it also takes something away. So you're getting a double dose of a reward, and that's what can make it very addictive and very problematic over time.
Okay, yeah, I can definitely relate to that energy piece, and maybe that's is that the age we're at, Brian? Is it?
Maybe I don't know.
When I have when the evening time, if it's at the end of the week, if it's that one or two we're talking about here, maximum 3 you're talking about. But then the next day, like I never schedule any kind of exercise the next morning, because I just know I don't sleep as well, even if it's a 2 or 3. I don't feel I have the energy for exercise. I could probably push it, but I'm feeling a lot more lethargic than I would normally, even after just like a really small amount. And I might have hang out like a sore throat kind of thing or something mild like that. It's just, it's small enough, but it's noticeable.
Yeah, it's definitely the age thing plays a key. Because I remember when I was younger, like you go out at 19, 20 years of age, you go on a bender and you're okay the next morning. You can get up and do things. So age definitely does play a role in that as well, I think.
One thing I think is interesting is and probably for yourself as well, when I was kind of growing up and I was 15, 16, 17 and discovering alcohol for the first time, there was, I guess, all the role models around me, friends or people that were a little bit older, they were kind of doing the same thing. So this was just a done thing. This is what you did. You went out and you kind of got hammered on a Friday or a Saturday night, if you could afford it. Now I'm seeing the 15, 16, 17-year-olds, and it's not ideal either, I would say, but I don't have as much of an issue with this now as many do. Let's say with the Instagram generation, which they're following some guy or girl in a gym, and maybe they're not following proper techniques. They're lifting heavy weights and they probably shouldn't do this kind of thing. But I don't know. Like I think that's a much better role model than when I was growing up. I wouldn't have minded having these guys or these girls to look up to, and they're
Brian Robson,
fancy, healthy food. Yeah, Brian Robson, Paul McGrath. Like this is it. But they were the role models at the time. Yeah.
Even watching that Jack Charlton documentary, like they were going to the pub and having peas and chips and a few beers and then going to play their match the next day. Like it's crazy. Now there was 11 playing field. I think a lot of people were doing that, but then the Europeans, we're back to the Europeans. They start setting the bar of no clean diets, no alcohol. And all of a sudden Europe went levels beyond England and Ireland in terms of football. So we had to catch up with them and stop that kind of behavior. But that role model thing is key. Now there's a really interesting thing around that as well, Brian, which I think is scary for the younger generation. So a lot of this younger generation, they're not drinking as much, but they're doing more drugs.
Okay.
Ketamine, speed, cocaine and stuff like that. And I was talking to someone recently, an addiction counselor that's been doing a bit of work with young kids as well. And they said, why don't you just have a drink anymore? Why would you do coke or something like that, or do whatever, snorting drugs? He says, they're calorie free. Right. So yeah, it's great that they're on Instagram following all of these great role models, but they still, if you want to have an outlet, they're still going out and they're partying, but they're taking calorie-free drugs as opposed to alcohol. So now you've got to weigh up the what's the worst of both worlds? Is it the drugs? Is it the alcohol? So it's scary little trends coming in as well.
That is, that's something that I have to admit now I wasn't aware of. But and so, and you see the Monster energy drinks is 0 calories, so it's a 0 calorie focus, isn't it?
Yeah, big time.
You spoke there about your own kind of path to recovery. Let's say for anyone listening in or maybe facing their own challenges, their own addictive behavior and whatever it might be, is there a defined path for everyone, or does that very much depend on the individual?
It very, very much depends on the individual for the most part. It really does. But I'm gonna do a little technique here. I recently done a course with a leading psychologist, friend of mine, Professor Yvonne Barnes-Holmes. She's been on the podcast, I believe, hasn't she?
Fantastic.
Yeah. So Yvonne is incredible. She is a wizard of a therapist, and we've done a course together on how to break bad habits. It was really around curbing alcohol use, smartphone use, and stuff like that as well, emotional eating. And basically, we went through the science of that, and really what way to look at it. And this is when it is for everybody, basically. Like, so everyone does have a different path. I had a different path. I had a perspective shift, I suppose. But there was certain elements that I did to change my bad habits. And I'm going to run through this with people, and this will really apply for everybody. So there's this thing basically known as the ABC of any behavior, any habit, any behavior, any habit, basically bad habit, is based on the ABC model. And the ABC means it's for antecedent, but let's call it a trigger. So A is for a trigger, B is the behavior, and C is the reward. So if there's a setting event, which is the trigger, the behavior, and the reward. Now let's just go through this. Let's say an example before COVID, and we'll talk about alcohol. So before COVID, you're coming home from the pub, you're driving home from work on a Friday, you're a little bit stressed, and you drive past the pub, right? So there's a setting event, an internal trigger, stress, an external trigger, the pub. You say, right, I'm going to go for a drink. And you probably have to go home for dinner, but it primes you to go for a drink. So you say, right, I'm going to have a drink later. So the behavior is the drinking. And then the C is the consequence. It's the reward. And if it's rewarding and it relieves the stress, or it gives you the buzz, whatever you want, loosens you up, all those things, the reasons we get people to drink, well, that habit will increase over time, or will persist and be sustained over time. So let's say someone then during COVID, they're in lockdown, they're stressed out of their heads, their kids are wrecking their heads. That's a trigger, and it could be a bigger trigger. So give me a bloody drink. They're going to drink. They're going to go to the office and have an alcoholic, have a drink. The consequence is they'll get relief, they'll be unstressed, and they'll wake up the next day even more anxious. And that's another trigger to have another drink and then get rewarded as well. And this can be really dangerous with alcohol as well, because people drink because they're anxious, but alcohol causes anxiety. So it's just this circular motion and this behavioral loop that gets in play. So now, nearly after COVID, people that didn't drink too much might just get a bit stressed from work, but they've learned over time, oh wow, an alcoholic beverage takes that stress away. They drink and it's a reward. So you mentioned that alcohol is down 6.6% over. Is that what is that? Actually, I'm interested in that statistic.
I just heard the headline. So overall consumption, or maybe it's alcohol sales in the whole for the whole country, is down 6.5%.
Yeah.
But if you consider, as I said, the pubs have been closed for over a year.
Yeah.
That means there's been a significant increase in off-license sales.
Yeah, massively.
And they're actually talking about the
Yeah.
impact that has on actually children. If children are seeing their parents.
Yeah.
But I haven't delved into the detail. We might try and link to that research actually.
Yeah.
The article.
It's funny as well, because I've been doing a lot of that stuff. I've been doing COVID trends, my PhD research as well. And what I'm finding is that lots more people are drinking more and taking more substances, but less people are. So some people are stopping. Overall, there's less people using, but the people that are using way more. So that's a problem with it as well. So it's becoming more severe for some people as well. But really, the ABC, that's the essence of any bad behavior. So if you're drinking too much at the moment, you can be guaranteed you've got to look at the triggers, the behavior, it's the drinking, and what rewards is it giving you. So what I would say to people is, if you want to look at this, right? So part of the problem with bad habits, and let's talk about alcohol, is we say things like, it's what we say to ourselves, so it's harmless, it's me time, it's a reward, so what else is there to do? I really enjoy it. But the reality is that we can also at the same time hear ourselves. If we really listen, and awareness is the key here. I wish I wasn't doing this. Look how much money I'm spending on this. This isn't really good for me health. And you really have to look at these habits. And I think that's really, really important. And a great little exercise for this is to ask yourself, how much time in years or daily time, hours, whatever, how much money, how much effort are you spending inside of this bad habit? And really try to notice how much you've poured into the days, weeks, months, years, or even hundreds of thousands of euro on bad habit. Like alcohol could be costing you a fortune, losing you so much time. So I think it's really important. Do a little journal and exercise on that, and write down the money, the effort, really get into that. And it's really important to recognize that. So that's about bringing awareness to the event, and that's really, really, really crucial, right? But if you want to change your patterns of behavior or alcohol use or whether it's emotional eating, smartphone use, being an angry person, any bad habits work the same way, right? So, but I'm going to talk about it in terms of alcohol use. So the first thing you have to do is you got to change your environment, change the triggers, right? So triggers can be external. Alcohol in the press, get rid of it. Get rid of the alcohol from the house. If you drive past the pub, and that's a trigger for you as we're going back into the normal world, well, hopefully, drive home another way. Like, change your environment so you're not being triggered by the environment. But I think the key piece is get the alcohol out of your house. Don't bring alcohol into your house. If it's junk food, don't bring junk food into your house. Change that. But then your internal triggers as well. Now, it's very hard to change stress and anxiety. It's a more difficult thing to do than getting rid of the alcohol. But what you could do is, like, that's where self-care comes in, meditation, gratitude, those kind of techniques. Work on yourself. But there's a great idea in recovery circles known as HALT. And this works for anything. It's not just in recovery. It's the 4 horsemen of recovery, they say. HALT. And it means, it's an acronym for hungry, angry, lonely, tired. If you're hungry, you'll be hungry. You might think, I need a drink. You're just craving food. Or you could be just thirsty. If you're angry, you might be more susceptible to having a drink. If you're lonely, same thing, lack of connection. There's a great line by a guy called Johann Hari. Sobriety is not the opposite of addiction. Connection is. So if you're lonely, reach out and talk to someone. And tired. If you're tired, you're just like, oh, give me a drink. You're just lethargic and you don't want to do anything positive. So change your environment inside and out is absolutely key. Changing the reward is really, really important as well. And if you work on stress and anxiety, well, it's not going to be as rewarding. But let's say in a more tangible note, go and buy 0% Heineken. So the ritual's still there. Yeah. You're going, but it won't be as rewarding because it's not relieving the stress. It's not giving you that buzz. So try that for a while. If you really want to reduce your drink, you'll be changing the reward part of the ABC. But it's also really important to track your behaviors and to shine awareness on the problem. So the idea beforehand was really around what I chatted about is write down the amount of days and time and effort you've spent. Really journal on that and write it down. But if you're trying to implement change, try to track your behavior to shine awareness on the problem. So track your triggers, right? This is what the trigger is. This is what the trigger is. Could be a certain time of the day when the kids go down. That could be a trigger. To clocking off for work, that could be a trigger. So become aware of the trigger. Then track the actual behavior. So if you're still having the odd drink or you're reducing your drink, track how much you're actually having more, shining awareness. And then also track your feelings. Are you frustrated because you can't have a drink? Are you angry? Track that as well. So if you're really really want to put this into place, that is a really key piece. And then the other one is replace the behavior with positive routines. So I already talked about that already, like changing your environment, your inside environment. So alcohol, if you stop drinking alcohol, in that vacuum, you're going to want to drink. If it's from 7 o'clock on a Thursday or Friday night, well, do something else. Read a book, go for a jog, go for a stroll, walk in nature. Replace the bad behaviors with positive routines. And I think that really is the essence. You've got to change that ABC. So look at the triggers, look at the behavior, track it, and then try to change the rewards. And it's really, there's an awful lot you can that's the essence that works. Your question was, does it work for everyone? Yeah. For me, I had a huge part of my recovery. I had my own journey, but so much relates to that. I implemented all of them tools within that, and it's a real universal strategy that you can use.
That's class. Yeah, listen, thanks for sharing that. I think I'll need to listen back to that one a couple of times myself, which I'm sure others will, but there's some brilliant stuff in there. Can I just, what's your own position on, so we're coming across, like, it's a serious issue, absolutely. And it needs to be dealt with seriously and discussed seriously. But there's also, I imagine, there's space for, there's people out there that have a positive relationship with alcohol, that are in control, they genuinely understand what moderation is. And just like you might have you're entitled to like an unhealthy meal, if your nutrition is spot on, you have a big, really bad pizza every now and then, a burger, not the end of the world. Like you're allowed to let your hair down a little bit. I think is what I'm saying. Yeah. I imagine it's the same, or am I right in saying it's the same with alcohol? You can.
Yeah, I think so. It's really a funny one. If you have a drink problem, now I don't think I'm a rare exception. I think there's many people in recovery possibly that just don't shout from the rooftops about it. I think this is the first time I've actually said it out loud. I didn't write it in my book because I didn't want people in recovery trying to copy me. And I would highly recommend people not to do that, because my brother himself, he's in recovery. He can't have a drink. It's just like, because he wants to have a drink. Like, I think the essence of it is, and I'm not talking about people in recovery, but I'm just giving an example of that. If you are craving a drink, that's not a good sign. So at the end of the day, what is a positive relationship with alcohol? And I think it's if you can take it or leave it, you don't get drunk, it's not causing any issues in your life, and you're under the recommended amount of alcohol per week. Now, the reality is, like, if you were living in a Zen monastery and everything was in perfect balance, like, I don't think you'd want to do that. But the reality is, we don't live in a Zen monastery. We're living in this crazy world, and COVID has hit the scene. So people are stressed, people are anxious. And you know what? Like, when I do have a glass of wine, I think the reason why I do have it, because I always regret it after, even within an hour. I'm saying, why did I do that? I'm doing it less and less. But there is a little loosening of that. There is a tiny little benefit that I see, but it's you're also playing with fire, especially if you have any addictive tendencies as well. Because if the environment shifts over time, you might use it as a crutch. So, but I do think some people can have it. But what always jumps back to me is, and I'm gonna be hyper critical here on both sides, jump on both, give the pros and the cons. I remember thinking, like, at the end of the day, the FDA said if alcohol came on the scene right now, the recommended limit will be like a tumbler of like a little tumbler. That's size, no little needle tumbler, another thing you put in your thumb, like per month or something ridiculous like that. That'd be the recommended dose per month. Like, they would not let that get a month, like something ridiculous that nobody would even bother with it if it came on the same now. So I'm sort of like, well, then we shouldn't be drinking. But then, like, Eckhart Tolle, who's this spiritual teacher and is someone I'm a huge fan of his work, and he's like as enlightened as they come, and he has the odd beer, and I'm like, well, if Eckhart can do it, maybe it isn't all that bad. So I think it very much depends on the person, but yeah, awareness. It always comes back to awareness for me. Awareness is the key, to be aware of it.
That's a great point. That kind of summarized it really nicely for me, the awareness. And as you said, so if you're craving it and if you feel like you can't do without it, then maybe it's time to take a step back. Yeah. And I don't know, some people give out about dry January, this kind of thing. I don't know. I always make sure I do it. I almost like to test myself just to make sure I'm still, there's no issues there, kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting as well, because that could be like a little insight there in itself. Like, if you think you have to have a dry January.
True, very true. Yeah, I've had that conversation a few times as well. But this year in particular as well. Like, normally you might be having a dry January because you've had maybe there's been a lot of parties to go to in December. Yeah. Because there's a few events coming up in February. So you said, right, I'll just have a nice kind of detox of a month in January. Whereas this year, I don't know, I guess I imagine it was the same for everyone, where there was very little happening in December and there was absolutely nothing to go to in February. So it was almost like, well, why would I even bother doing it this year? But I just said, I keep myself in a straight and narrow, just keep myself in check, just do it. Why not? And give myself that little extra health kick.
Yeah, definitely. No, I totally agree. And I think I would come on the side of the fence, coming from addiction. I'd be on the side of the fence of don't go there, that way. But I think you have to take into account that this is the society we live in. And you look at people, there is a lot of people that successfully drink. If there is a way to successfully drink out there, it seems to be. Sometimes I struggle to understand that. How can people go out for a good few drinks, actually get drunk and get up the next day and function? I can't do that. I just know I can't do that. So some people can. I think age dependent as well. But again, I think awareness is the key.
Yeah, great point. Any thoughts for... There's a lot of kind of HR leaders, wellbeing leaders in the workplace listening in here. A lot of workplaces they have policies on, alcohol policy, a drug policy. Is there anything they can do, maybe, that these leaders, from a proactive perspective, maybe to support colleagues?
Yeah, definitely. And there's loads of groups out there like Drink Aware and stuff like that.
I was going to mention them. Yeah, drinkaware.ie and ask about alcohol as well.
Yeah, loads of addiction centers and just do awareness campaigns. But I think the best thing they can actually do is to implement some kind of anonymous thing, because there's still a huge stigma. Like, it's okay to have a drinks, and it's okay to go on a bender in Ireland for the most part, especially when you're younger. It gets a bit sadder as you get older. But like, still a huge stigma around people in addiction. And I'm sort of very freely talk about my addiction, and I don't feel stigma because I'm so open about it. But people do personally feel stigma, and if they have a drink problem themselves and are embarrassed about it, they'll lie about it. And when you start lying to other people about it, you'll start lying to yourself. Like you will start. That's where self-delusion kicks in. So I think what's really important for employers to do is to create some kind of anonymous way for people to reach out. And I'm sure that's what they would do. They wouldn't be asking for a list of people, but make it as anonymous as possible and make it as obviously anonymous as possible. That, because I think some people are like, oh yeah, but the job are setting up this thing with this crowd and it's going to be anonymous. Yeah, but they'll know, they look at them details. But that's not the way these things work. No. And you could set up a way of doing it that it's like 100% anonymous, separate body outside, that they could just contact them with a unique ID number. They can give even a fake name. I don't know what way to implement that, but make it truly anonymous so people will actually be more inclined to take that first step. And I think that's really critical.
Sure, yeah, and add in some education, if you like, or at least some information around. That was someone, an organization like drinkaware.ie or Ask About Alcohol. They can come in and do some sessions.
Yeah, and I think I don't know the ins and outs of like what Drinkaware do, but I think there should be more science-based kind of programs around looking into change and habits, like some of the stuff that I discussed there. I think they tend to give the recommendations and very good tangible advice. I don't really know the ins and outs of what it was, but I have glanced at different procedures before, and I just think more could be done in terms of the science and bringing more towards that and making it more it's like making it more active and alive. Like some of these programs, they're just so boring. Like it's like gloom, like you're in addiction, it's gloom. And I'm not saying make it into this big TV show or something like that where it's going to entertain people, but make it more attractive so people will go and actually put themselves in place for these things. Because like it's just when you read some of these what you should do, it's just like, I don't know, there's no magic wand, but I just think it could be more interactive. It could keep people more engaged when they get into these shows or into these programs. And I just think a little bit more can be done. I don't even know what I'm trying to say. I just think there's something lacking. There's just something lacking. Yeah, more can be done.
Yeah, I imagine it's a difficult one for people to sell almost in the workplace. You think, oh, we've got Drinkaware coming in to give a talk about alcohol.
Like I'm nearly yawning hearing that. Like, here's drink.
Everyone's going to go, oh, here we go. We're going to get beaten with a stick here and it's not like that. Like I know Marie and Sheena in there, and they do really great work.
Yeah,
but it's actually not like that at all.
Yeah, I've no idea. I've no idea. Yeah.
It's just it's a hard sell. No matter what, it's a hard sell.
Do you know what it is, even? I think that's the crux of it there. So it's not what the other companies are doing. I think it's the how the companies advertise it to their employees. And I think this is a problem. Like imagine you're saying, right, to stop drinking alcohol, to relieve anxiety, to get rid of stress, all of these things. Yeah, they're great things to get, but it's just like, it's looking at it from the negative view, the negative perspective. So I think it's around bringing in things that are looking at it from the positive perspective. Here's how to change your habits and thrive in the world. So it's not about surviving, it's about thriving. So you can get other people involved as well in more of a preventative action, because sometimes when people get into addiction, it's very hard to pull them out. But if they brought programs into right, here's how to create better habits, here's how to eliminate negative habits, and bring people on the journey that way, and make it more enticing for people to engage in these programs, rather than just here's how to stop drinking, here's how to get rid of the negative. So look at it from the positive perspective. I think that's really what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, really, really well said. And I think I've mentioned it before on the podcast, but language is so important. There's a great example of a workplace out there where they hosted an anxiety workshop 1 week. Hardly anybody turned up. They ran the very same workshop 2 weeks later. They called it a mental strength workshop, and there was a really good attendance at it.
Yeah,
so it just shows you so language is important. How
language is crucial. I'll give you an example as well, Brian, with blogging. So I be a blogger as well, and writing stories, and it's just the power of words. So I wrote my book about my first time doing heroin, and I remember writing a blog about that, and I wrote it addiction comes in many flavors, something or other. Here's how I fell in love with my first time, some sort of crappy title, and it basically got 0 views. I changed that to, this is what doing heroin for the first time feels like. 250,000 views to date, and it's made me like, I think I'm nearly at 10 grand. That blog has made me on Medium, like, so just by the power of language is absolutely crazy. Like, it really is. It's reframes everything.
Brilliant. Yeah, so important. But before we finish, I want to ask you as well, because one of the questions we got on one of the webinars, and it kind of stood out, and I really wanted to make sure we kind of answered it because it's a really important one, was someone had asked, you know, I can't remember, was it a family member or certainly a close friend who they could see, they believed clearly had issues with alcohol, but hadn't kind of recognized it or admitted it themselves. And they were asking, like, how do I approach this person in as, you know, as compassionate a way as possible? And because they really cared for this person clearly, and they wanted them to positively do something about it. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's the big question. It's the one that always comes up for me as well. I was on a talk there last week and on a webinar, and you were able to up votes for the most popular questions. It was a big webinar. There's lots of people on it, and this one just shut up. Everyone was voting for this. Everyone wanted the answers for this, and unfortunately, there's no great answer to this. I think you really put the nail on the head with a word in there, and it's compassion. People want to do it compassionately. But there's a book behind me there. It's called Awareness by Anthony DeMello, and he actually done a lot of work. He's was a great spiritual teacher. He's my Bible. It was for part of my recovery, and he done a lot of work with addicts in Ireland. As it happens, he's from India. But he done a lot of work with addicts in Ireland, and something he said was that the addict or the alcoholic, they have the knowledge that alcohol and drugs are bad. They have the knowledge that it's going to kill them early in life, but they have not got the awareness. Once you get the awareness, you can't help but change. And that's what I found with me. All of a sudden, I was aware, and I was like, why didn't anyone tell me? Like, why didn't anyone? They did, but I wasn't ready to listen. Right. And that's the core problem right there. So I think all you can actually do, like, if you go and start telling people that they have an issue, that they need to do this, they need to do that, they need to go to drink aware, any of these things, they're going to put up a shield. They're going to put up a wall. The addictive ego is a monster, and it will put up the shield and it will not listen. It will go against that. So they just won't listen to that. So talking is not a good thing to do. One of the best things you can do is to actually listen. If they're willing to talk, try to go in and listen as best you can. And I don't mean listen to reply and listen to tell them what to do to fix their problems, because they know they have issues. What they need sometimes is just an ear to actually listen, so they actually felt heard. So really listen to understand. And the power in that would be very frustrating, because you're not going to be able to fix the problem. And I'm a fixer. Even now, with this knowledge behind me, when someone tells me an issue, I want to fix their problem. But they're not going to be able to, they can't do anything about it. You have to look at it from their perspective. So just be an empathic listener and be that presence for them if they want to talk. Now, what will happen then over time, if they're ever in a position where they are thinking about getting clean or they are looking for help, well, you've opened yourself up as someone that listens, so they're going to come back to you and talk to you about that problem. So there's nothing you can really actively do. It's more of a passive action, just be the listener. But the one thing you can actively do is look after yourself. Because here's the thing, like, let's say somebody is struggling with anxiety and they drink too much, and then you also struggle with anxiety. You're not drinking as much, but you have a few drinks. Well, who are you to tell them what to do? Like, you haven't even got your own house in order. You might be less of an addict than them, but you haven't got your own house in order. So you've got to look after yourself first and foremost. And when you look after yourself and you be the active listener for that person, well, do you know what they're going to think? Well, I want a bit of what they have, and they listen to my woes. I'm going to go to them. So when they're in a position to look for help, you're going to be in a position to give help. And I know it's cliche, but it comes back to that message. Like when the adult is on an airplane and the cabin pressure goes, they've got to put on their own oxygen mask first. Look after yourself, and then you can help your child, but then you can help the other person. So you've got to make sure you're looking after yourself. That's first and foremost. But there's no magic wand for this. That's the unfortunate thing.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. And, you know, I see a lot of overlap there with when I deliver positive mental health conversations workshop, and so much overlap there. It's actually not about starting the conversation, really. It's more about active listening skills, you know, being there. This happens over a period of time. Like the goal actually is to make yourself over time be that little bit more approachable to listen to understand, as you said, as opposed to listen to solution. You're not looking to solve the world's problems, or even this person's problems. Listen to understand, empathize, understand, and just be there over time. And I think you should over time find that, that person will open up to you.
Yeah, over time is the key piece.
Yeah.
Patience is a virtue. And it's interesting what you say as well. Like, some people may think, I get a lot of emails of people think that they have an email exchange with me or a conversation with me, I can fix their addiction woes or their family's addiction woes. But even with the experience I have, like, I'm doing a PhD in addiction. I've been an addict for years. I teach addiction in Trinity College. Like, I do lots of elements around that. But if I'm meeting a person and they have addiction issues, I haven't got the solution to their problems.
Yeah.
Because their journey is so different than mine, and addiction is so complex. Like, people don't drink because nobody wants to be an addict, nobody wants to be an alcoholic. It's coming from somewhere else. There's an underlying core issue, whether it's emotional pain, trauma, or something else, and that's our own journey. So people have to work on that first. So it's always like comorbid is the jargon used in psychology terms, with either anxiety, depression, or other elements as well. So it's very complex. So it's to understand that, yeah, you might have a solution for yourself, but you haven't got the solution for them. And everyone's on a different journey, and just listen to their journey. I think that's the important message.
Is it possible to compare addictions, like alcohol addiction, drug addiction, gambling, social media addiction?
Yeah, 100%. At the end of the day, and it comes back to those habits. Like, at the end of the day, every addiction is entwined within the habit. It's triggered by something. There's the behavior of the addiction, whether it's like emotional eating, whether it's picking up your smartphone, whether it's gambling, putting on a bet, and then there's the reward. So every addiction at its core, behaviorally and biologically, is the same. Like, it's a dopamine response. Obviously, like with hard drugs like cocaine and amphetamines, you're actually physically interacting with the neurotransmitters within the brain. But at the same time, even though smartphones and gambling, there's nothing physical about them, there's nothing biological about them, it's still an extra release of dopamine. So they're behavioral, they're biologically the same. All addictions are the same. There's subtle differences within each of them as well, but you can definitely compare addictions. I basically think, like, if heroin wasn't on the scene, I would have been, with the traumas that I had in my life, it would have been just alcohol. If there was no substances around, it would have been something else. Like, at the end of the day, you're just trying to get away from yourself. Like, there's a reason why they say, I want to get out of my head, because you can't live there. It's too busy. It's too emotionally charged. So you want to get out of your head, because that's what you're trying to avoid. And I think every addiction at the end of the day has its core, has its essence in there.
Brilliant, Brian. Listen, you've been amazing as always. Could talk to you all day about this and plenty of other subjects. Just final question. Like, what's next for you? It's the PhD. It's what else have you got going on?
Yeah, so excuse me. So it's the big one's the PhD. I have a couple of months, end of June, to get that over the line. And I think I'm going to take a nice, I'd say a nice long break. I love me work too much, so I'll probably take a weekend.
Long weekend.
Be careful, to kill me if she hears this. But it's like, I'm gonna go on a couple of holidays. Hopefully it will be outside of Ireland. I don't think it will be. It'll probably be around Ireland. We're planning on going for a cycling holiday if you get a bit of good weather. I'm going to chill out time. I want to get back into reading more books, chill out, and like, it's about learning. And like, if you want to put messages out there to the world, it's about learning. So for me, it's going to be, as soon as I start get the PhD out of the way, getting back to the basics of learning, creating new courses, and always working on my big goal as well, which is I have a long-term goal of trying to help kids deal with these issues as well. So that's more of a long 5 to 10 year goal. So I'll be doing a bit of work on that in the summer as well.
Class. That sounds absolutely brilliant. Yeah. And by the way, I did a big cycling holiday there a few years ago, so happy to give you some advice on that. I
will be taking you up on that, Brian. Cheers, man. Cheers.
Yeah, I can highly recommend it. Brian, listen, thanks so much for your time. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
And best of luck with the PhD.
Cheers, man.
Hello, everyone. Brian here again. A big thank you for listening right to the end of this episode of the Work Well podcast. I want to give a big shout out to our partners, the Fruit People, who are leading the way in workplace nutrition, both in office and remotely. You can check them out at thefruitpeople.ie. And it's with thanks to the Fruit People that we have a delicious fresh fruit and healthy snack pack to give away to one lucky listener for each episode of season 3. To find out how to enter, go to workwellpodcast.com and find the link to the latest podcast episode. Finally, are you interested in diving deeper in the area of workplace well-being? Why wouldn't you? You need to check out the WorkWell Institute. The WorkWell Institute is an online hub for all your workplace well-being, education, and training needs, whether you're an individual or an organization. Head on over to workwellinstitute.org, where you'll find out the details on all the courses available, including my flagship program, Developing a Workplace Wellness Program That Lasts. Check it out at workwellinstitute.org. Thanks again for listening. The original music for this podcast was composed by my friend Greg Clifford. Thank you, Greg. Remember to work well, stay safe, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Work Well podcast.